Most managers really struggle with giving employees poor performance ratings. But with a little bit of planning up front, we can remove the stress out of that conversation and really have the performance review be a value-added proposition. So the discomfort that managers feel really come from three different things. The first one is they know they've procrastinated, they've waited, they've delayed. Performance review must never be a surprise. So if this is going to be anything like a surprise, that's a problem. It's stress-inducing. Secondly, they know they haven't done a good job tracking the performance throughout the performance review period, so they don't have as many facts to go back to. And then thirdly, the performance objectives themselves are often flawed. They're not written in a format that allows for an objective review, so the review is arguably going to be either subjective or inaccurate. These are problems, they induce stress, but they can be avoided with a little bit of planning up front, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'm Jeff LaSalle, I'm your leadership coach, and if you would take a minute, just go down below and hit the like and subscribe buttons, and then we'll keep the videos coming. Okay, so the first stress-inducing factor that we talk about during performance reviews is that the managers have procrastinated. They haven't dealt with things as they've occurred throughout the year or performance period. So this is really critical. Poor performance or even good performance must never be a surprise at the time of the performance review. It should almost be just a final check that, yep, we're in agreement, move on. So we cannot procrastinate. When something happens, either when a behavior becomes evident, good or bad, that we want to either confront or reward, we need to do something quickly. If a metric starts to go out of control, we want to do something quickly. If an event happens and we need to investigate and have ramifications of that, we want to do so quickly and immediately. So there was a psychologist back in the 19th century who did a lot of studying on memory and fact retention, and this was Ebbinghaus. Ebbinghaus has a classic curve out there that shows what we remember and for how long. And basically his curve shows that after even just one day, we've already forgotten all but 33% of the information related to the event. So if an event happens today, by the end of tomorrow, we've already forgotten all but 33%. That's incredible. So it tells you the power we cannot delay. It gets worse though. If we wait 1 month, then we only recall 21% of the facts related to the investigation or the event. And so if we only remember clearly 21%, then there's so much room for disagreement, we can't have a common fact base. And to measure performance, we must have a common fact base. So timeliness becomes critical. The second reason that timeliness is so critical is because timeliness is required for us to reinforce things and be very clear on our expectations. So if something happens, let's say there's a behavior that is positive that happens, you want to almost catch that person in the act of that good behavior and say something immediately. The same thing with bad behavior. You want to immediately confront that bad behavior and make sure the person understands why it's bad, what's bad about it, and that it should not happen, and how to do things correctly. So this timeliness allows us to reinforce the values and the objectives that we need to have in place to have a good, solid work culture. As an example of timeliness, let's think about an airplane that takes off from an airport. And let's say they're leaving New York and they're headed for San Francisco. That's great. We're going to have a great vacation in San Francisco, except the pilot just sets the course at the beginning of the flight and doesn't touch the controls at all. We're just going on that path. Well, what's going to happen at the end of the flight time is we're going to have to make this massive correction to our position because we haven't accounted for changes in wind velocity and changes of wind direction or air resistance or whatever else airplanes encounter up there in the sky that causes them to veer off course a little bit. So what does a typical airplane pilot do during flight is they're constantly making these minor adjustments so that the plane stays on track, and of course much of this is automated today. The plane stays on track and gets to San Francisco as opposed to ending up in someplace in the Pacific Ocean. This is a great example of timely intervention to make sure that you get the outcome that you want. Okay, so the second thing that gives managers all that angst leading up to performance review time is they know they've done a lousy job of recording things throughout the year. And this goes along with the Ebbinghaus curve. So if after 1 month you're down to 21% recall of facts, imagine what it is at the end of a year. You can't remember anything that happened earlier in the year with any sort of accuracy. So how on earth are you going to write a performance review? So not only is it important to timely deal with performance, good or bad, or events, good or bad, but it is also really important to document, so that when it comes time to write that review, you've got the evidence right there at your fingertips. Typing the review then becomes very easy because you've got everything you need to do so. Okay, so the third reason that managers feel a lot of stress leading into performance reviews is they know that, when it's time to write the goals at the beginning of the year, we were in a hurry, we didn't do a good job, the goals aren't well written. That's a real problem when it comes time to evaluate them at the end of the year. You can't evaluate a poorly written goal. If it's not objective, you're not going to agree on the interpretation of the goal, and then you can't agree on the interpretation of performance. So how do you deal with this? You deal with it up front when you're setting the objectives. The objectives need to be in a SMART format. What is SMART? Okay, so SMART, S stands for specific. The goal must be specific. M, measurable. I've got to be able to measure it. So, units per shift of output, for example, very measurable. Number of events per employee, very measurable. Okay. A is achievable. Now this one's a bit of a double-edged sword. You need to set objectives that are required by the business. If there's a business need that needs to be met, and you're not quite sure how to achieve that level of performance, you can't say, well, I'm not sure how to do it, so therefore we're not going to have that objective. No. The objective must be what the business needs dictate. So if the business needs are for 5 of something, and you know how to deliver 3 from a little bit of stretch from past history and ideas of implementing continuous improvement, you can't have the goal of 3 or even 4. The business demands 5. You need to figure out how to get 5. That needs to be the objective. So achievable, that's a little bit questionable there, how you interpret achievable. But really it comes down to the next one, which is relevant. So a goal of 3 when you need to have 5 would not be relevant to the business need. So R, relevant. T is time-bound. Usually that's the course of the year or month or whatever the period is during which performance is being measured. But there may be milestones along the way where timeliness is important also. So time-bound, that's the T. So SMART, that's the acronym. Remember it. Format your objectives that way. It removes a lot of the angst from the process at the end of the year because you know how to measure it. You've agreed on what is important. So if we've done all of our work well and we do it well throughout the year, performance is not a surprise because we've dealt with things as they've come up. We've confronted performance. We've rewarded good behavior. We've challenged the bad behavior. There's no surprise. We've dealt with things, we've recorded things, and we had good, objective, SMART goals written at the beginning of the year. Well, you know what? The performance review then becomes almost this non-event, even if you're giving a poor performance review. Really, you don't spend much time reviewing the year because you've already reviewed it. You spend most of the time then talking about how do we get better. And that's really what the value is in the performance review. You agreed on what the performance is because you've been talking about it all along. And now you're talking about how are we going to avoid this next time? How are we going to get better, even better than we've agreed to during the course of the year? And that's the value add. All right, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this. Again, if you would click the like and subscribe button, we'll keep the videos coming.